This is Twilight Prepper, and today I'm going to be bringing you the update of why we're probably going to be moving closer to a civil war, if nothing more, within 25 years, basically from last year. I'd almost put $100 down on it every single month, but since I was talking fictitiously, someone will throw $100 on me, run off, and I'll pick it up and they'll charge me later. So I'm going to say why we're going to have the Civil War. Donald Trump, basically with all of his ingenuity and everything else, and his super intelligence, and yes, I've heard he's really just paid millions of dollars to scientists to change Pluto from being a planet because he messed up something in elementary school and everybody thinks everything's for sale now. So, oh well, here we go. That being aside, and whatever crazy rumors, this one was actually delivered on a long speech on Fox. They don't really play him on CNN or anything else, so no one ever knows whatever the president's doing. Moving along from this, Donald Trump actually has said that the First Baptist Church was founded in the 1500s by a person from Providence, Rhode Island. This technically is false. There were no Christian churches in the United States with Christian clergy or anyone else from that. They were all from former slaves taken from the area and were allowed to go there and open up colony and be in charge of it, so long as they didn't mess up on any shipments or anything else. No person was allowed, especially even under English law and the Protestants, to make any churches here. Same with anyone in the Catholic areas. Christopher Columbus did not establish a church. He only let those that were prisoners of war, that were used for navigation and help and aid in translation, they had there from slavery and places that were not sanctioned ships going across. They basically had stopped this for about 50 years. And yes, there were ships that actually did travel all the way back from Turkey and everywhere else to the main land areas of basically Brazil, northward all the way to Virginia and Maryland. There was not allowed to be a Christian church established anywhere out there under any ship or anything else until 1619, the year before the Pilgrims came. That's why they went to mainland Europe, trying to show that their faith was not any form of coercion or anything deadly or dastardly, and was a peaceful thing that even Jesus could accept, but yet they were still given a clergy member in order to establish a church there, and it went very wrong. As everything went along with this, Donald Trump, in saying that happened beforehand, nullifies the fact over the tribalistic return of peoples to here, and the fact that the Christian church is, yes, a confiscator of Jewish and anything of the Old Testament. Any of the situations that are still allowed in the Testament out there are only allowed for them to say, use it, take it until they break it. Even the church itself was confiscated as a small situation, even Christian shrines and so on, and then put into the Christianity of the situation. Now, as going along with the Christianity of the situation out there, and how they then allowed the people to come back and bring the church and say, don't worry, when you build it, we understand your church is your church, and these water rituals and things are yours. In isolation, these groups did have slight variances. And these slight variances, yes, they did bring some way of trying to pit two or three young people against each other, even though they were basically the same, and some hostilities broke out, mostly in just small little duels or 4 or 5 people fighting with each other. And it was used to say, none of y'all know anything, and only we can. So everything was now reconfiscated underneath Christendom, and they had all the documents and everything else of wherever they were going to that they could find all these Jewish groups. In the United States, there were natives and others. Yes, there was a huge time just before most of the colonization. There was actually metallurgy and looms and everything else in major industrial agriculture. There's several other stories to go along with that. I'm not going to say that here. But in doing this, with saying that Christianity went back to the beginning of 1492, this does bring up the whole situation of what the First Civil War was fought over. The Union were basically just mercenaries for the National Army. The North was segregated into the Union and the National Army. You actually had to make certain standards in order to be part of the National Army. The South, being that it had been replaced and taken over by basically land privateers from Catholic areas, and was a satellite buffer state for that which was Maximilian and Santa Anna and a couple others. One in particularly with the Fremont expedition that tried to take over and claim the throne of the Aztecs after killing the highest ranking person by their standard of saying. Just like Maximilian killed off someone from the Incas, and Santa Anna killed someone from the Mayan. In with this and everything, yes, the United States has fought against the Holy Roman Empire. One pushed its Christian groups of Catholicism out, and while they only let the high-ranking peoples for study and the spies against the Confederacy return and kind of stay there, they went through and systematically removed every single person and sent them with their cornerstones of their churches back overseas, just like they would do in the northern national area. And so long as they sent the clergy back with all the cornerstones back to Italy and their main country and the mother church, that was considered legal. With this, people ended up having fairly good existence, and there wasn't any real churches. But during a lot of the riots and stuff that ensued after the Civil War, even up to today, they bring the cornerstones back, and that church really has been there since the 16 to 1800s. It really has existed here. Even when they have a rededication of the cornerstone with that, which is a form, just like how the 3 previous people I've mentioned, of Maximilian and the Holy Roman Empire back to Santa Anna, that means they killed another person who was supposedly standing in their way to remake Christianity here. Everybody says this can't be true, but it is. In doing this, Donald Trump has basically opened up the United States to look at it however it is and preserve documents. Many documents that actually support the situation of how clergy was sent over, how only slaves from their indigenous areas could be sold to the area until about, I think, the year before Trail of Tears. And that no one was allowed to be participating in anything. And only then foreigners could be sold as slaves there because the other places would learn too much about the system. In this, Donald Trump, in saying that, and then the next day abolishing the Department of Education, which is a big, kind of like late 18 teens to, how should we say, early 1820s. He has made it to where there will be a line drawn. There will be little pockets of stuff. They found a huge amount in Portland in these little eclectic museums, and they were burned almost completely. All these records of founding fathers being Native Americans, the reason why there was the chant Manifest Destiny, anything else like that, they were all taken out and burned because they didn't match anything for it. The fact that there was not anything. And with that, the departments of education will destroy at their state levels the education that does not match their ways. They will be taking out any information that does not stand with that. And as it is, there will be little pockets that will show up in these states, and they will be destroyed just like in the Kansas War. Kansas was the biggest one everyone knew of. Little parts of the states and everything else, and they would just burn different ones down. Harper's Ferry, in a way, where they came back and wanted to try and take out so many of them that were in Virginia because it was such an economic powerhouse back then, and raided it several times. I think there was the John C. Calhoun raid. There was the raid by Brown. And you could say both of them were on each other, on opposing sides in a way, and other stuff like that. But it was pretty radical that they were trying to take the largest armory in the U.S. so they could fund their ideology of however it was. And make the Civil War then at those different raids and having everything done with everything else. With all this being done, the situation has came up that we will probably be segregated out. And we are currently trying to see if we can nullify people's birth certificates, like in the let's say 1837 to 1849, and deport people. And while they're only showing south of the border, another thing with the Monroe Doctrine, with it being quashed and dissolved, and we don't really believe in that, that happened very much about 10 years after the Trail of Tears. We completely abandoned it and said there would be no going south of anywhere. And there's a lot of things kicking around for the Civil War here. You can all be like, oh, you're a Trump hater, you're this, that, and the other. In a way, the USA wants the Civil War, because it's like we take all of your best espionage agents that can actually just plop here and live populace-wise. And populace was big in the 1840s and 1850s. Excuse me. Then the intellectual, learned people came along for politics. The ideologicals. And it was so just like back and forth, super hot, super cold. I think we're getting ready to do some of that. It ain't flipping the pillow. It's just something is getting ready to move. And I'll be honest, I'm born 1980. I can remember a lot of things on the television, such as Jesse Jackson and the 1984 Democratic Convention, screaming progressive white. And people look at me and go, Colin, you're the weirdest looking white man I ever seen in my life. They do. But whatever. I can remember right after that next year, when the United States lost 7.5% of its population that were USA citizens and registered, only USA citizens, that were basically registered at some point in some European Christian nation, non-Soviet Union, such as like Polish Christian theocratic country, England, Christian theocratic country, German, Danish, Italian, France, Spanish, all that. Whether they should have been in the reservation in Poland, which is totally different than a reservation in the USA or anywhere else in the world. And we lost 7.5% of our population. They poofed. And you can basically prove that anywhere out there. They even have things on Discovery Channel called the Silent Holocaust. And these were all people that were able to be proven that were Jewish. Not trying to go in with how Catholic says Judah is just someone who bullies them, so they throw them in the slave pit and they're all technically belligerents. And they want to say that's really Hebrew. Not going with any of that, but in 1985, there was the establishment of the papal residency in New York City. It was basically at 1985, and we had a lot of stuff right before then. Hear how bad it was in like the 70s in New York, and some of this stuff is just sci-fi. It was so bad. And they actually go through the ruins, and it's like this is the best part of this movie, Wolfen. And it's in the first like 5 or 6 minutes of it. And those are all like areas where it's like, didn't a bomb go off here? Oh no, it's just they were so old they just collapsed. And it's like you see all these collapsed buildings and these gutted out by fire buildings and that and Serpico and some of these other like New York movies are like filmed there in like the 1970s and early 80s. And then all of a sudden there's this major reconstruction boom there. And people could actually live there. And like, you know, it's like what, a third of New York in 1985 was condemned and at the end of the year and was unlivable. And people don't really realize that being 30 years to 40 years solid after like 1945, the end of World War II, or 1956, and like, you know, you were over there still like on cleanup duty, reconstruction, cleanup duty, and you came back over, you could still keep your military surplus as a military veteran that was over there in theater or reconstruction. So you got to keep your flamethrowers, you got to keep your bazookas, you got to keep your machine guns, got to keep your M1 Garand, and you could keep your hand grenades. And you were trained in basically civilian, terrorist, plainclothes warfare. When the papal residency came there, they had the Swiss Guard take over the Secret Service. This was on the news at the time, the national news. They had the Secret Service stand down and took complete control over the United States for its security. And they then went out and established a papal residency. It was consecrated. Anyone who opposed them were shot down. We had a Secret Service shortage. The Swiss Guard took over. And basically what they coined the Jewish Mafia. And every civilian that had anything marched on the papal residency. This is one of the biggest things out there, like to cover up a Soho. And now it's just like the last night of Soho, and there's like a murder or something that never got reported over at a movie theater. Craziness. Anyway, these people went there. It wasn't with shotguns, it wasn't with Molotovs and everything, but that's what they ended up with. They had their bazookas, they had everything, and they went after that just like they would the King of England. If he came there and said he was establishing a residence and everything there underneath his government. And it's like, well, New York or whatever let this happen. Don't worry, Birmingham did the same thing in the 1820s. And the Pinkertons suffered a major catastrophic loss of people. And then they had to be rebuilt and brought back in. With all of this, they said that obviously that's where the Confederacy will be at and it will move away. or else it'll move somewhere else and just leave our shores if we keep pushing it out. And it's like, well, eventually it left about the 1840s or 1850s, and one person said that the last office of it was 1860. What was it, the year before the Civil War? 1859. And that they were handling the finances of stuff in Virginia and North Carolina because they're such economic powerhouses, and there wasn't oil in Texas or someplace. Anyway, with this, supposedly every single person that could went out there against them, and the Swiss Guard liquidated them and had open firefights throughout New York. And back then, it was nothing for people to, even on the B movies that you would be like, what's a movie we never heard of? And you look those up and just read the back of them. They all got pictures of like Tech 9, people with Tech 9s and Uzis going around there shooting and up the place and everything else. And it goes all the way across the USA for like 7 years and ends up in 1991 and 92. And everybody is out there, and the big things for everybody's always packing heat back in the day. Now you don't really hear that on the stuff. Even in the riots, it was never publicized like it was then. Now, with this, I know I'm going to make a lot of people angry. I know I am. And I remember it being on television. I remember that so poignantly, and people always bring it up to me, even in high school. It's like, I'm just trying to make friends with people and keep following people around and talking to them, trying to just figure out a way to hang out so I don't have to be with the parents. And they had Swiss Guard embedded into high school, and they would just turn around and give me the whole rundown really quick about how I don't ever need to mess with the Swiss again. I was just talking, I thought we'd be friends. Whatever it is that you're going to have, that's mine now. And they really can't orchestrate that. And you act like they can't. And it's like all across the East Coast, everywhere you go to, you'll meet another little group or little clique of theirs. From the street thug down there, if you stay in the place 3 or 4 days, and it'll go all the way up to a police officer or a marshal or an FBI agent, or even joined with that, over to anything you'll find. And the Swiss Guard will just be there. And they'll instantly just come off on you because you said something or something else. And it's like, whatever your history is, whatever anything is, that's our family now. And it's the truth. And you can be like, oh, Colin, you just looked off to the left. It's not like the first time. Whatever. That's just where the window is. Anyway, going on about certain things and everything else, I'm being totally honest. These people brought all that and were shot down. You could have an armored car without a permit back then and make your own armored vehicles. They didn't stand a chance. By people who just showed up out of there and were able to smuggle stuff in. This is stuff that really was on the newsreels and everything, but such is life. Anyway, I'm going to sign off with it here, and I'll try to bring something else back with the Ukraine update here later tonight. And you can choose which one to look at, domestic or international. Twilight Prepper, signing off.